Yes, good morning, everyone. We're going to wait just a couple of more minutes so we can start with the presentation today. Glad that you are here with us connecting. Thank you. So one more minute and we're going to start with the presentation. Thanks again for being here. So good morning, everyone. Welcome and thanks for connecting with us today. My name is Victor Cruz. I'm the new business advisor of the Hispanic Business Center. So it's my pleasure to serve you in every need that you have in this situation or in the future. And today we are going to have the pleasure of having the director of the Hispanic Business Center with us on the topic on tips and tools for reopening business in this situation that we are having around us. So with no further ado, we're going to give Janice the mic so she can start presenting.
Gracias, Victor. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Buenos dias. Thank you for joining us again for another segment of Business as Unusual. As you know, this is our weekly webinar to provide content to entrepreneurs and business owners on how to manage their business during this period of COVID-19, right? And so today's topic is really as the state is starting to reopen and creating guidelines based on industries on how to get your business back to opening its doors, or at least allowed to open its doors. What does that mean, right? What does that mean for you as an entrepreneur, and how can you be ready and making sure that you are maintaining the safety rules, the rules that the state want us to, and also protecting your customers and communicating with your customers and employees on that. So hopefully today we'll be able to share with you some helpful tips and tools. Feel free to write questions on the chat line. We will also open up the microphones later on towards the end, and so you could add any comments or questions you might have related to the content. So we'll get the slides up here now. Get started. So the first thing we want to cover is there we go. Basically what's happened, right? There's been a lot of announcements in the last week from the governor and the state related to what industries can start to reopen, right? So we know that May 12th, retail open. So most retail stores are able to commence, or most of them, as we've seen, have started to open their doors back up. On May 15th, restaurants were allowed to open with outdoor seating only, right? So this meant that if they had a patio or some sort of outdoor environment, that they could begin to have customers dine in, but for outdoor only. Also, personal service started. So hair salons, barbershops, massage parlors were also allowed to commence effective May 15th. May 21st, which was last night, bars and restaurants now are able to have indoor and outdoor dining, or, being able to visit the establishments. So this weekend, we know may be a busy weekend for those restaurants that have been able to open for indoor dining and customer experience. The long-awaited gym and fitness centers, right? We've seen how controversial this has become about gyms and fitness centers being able to open. So this week on the 26th, they will be allowed to open as well. And then lastly, May 31st, daycares and day camps are able to open as well. So this is just a brief summary. Obviously, if you need more information, please visit the state of Ohio website. Maybe we could put a link to that information on the chat line for your convenience. But really paying attention to what dates are for everything, because unfortunately it wasn't all at once. It's been a little teaspoon, but every week we've gotten a little more leeway as far as what is going to be open during the month of May. And the reality is, by June 1st, pretty much everything is back to being able to open, obviously with many limitations. So speaking of those limitations, we'll move on here. We picked, some of the most common ones as far as industries that we work with, right? We work with a lot of restaurants. Not only do we work with them, we frequent them and support them, and are a champion of our food-based businesses, and understand how hard they were hit through COVID with complete stop of operations, or maybe very limited. So one of the things that I thought the governor did that was very good is that they didn't limit the amount of capacity. So they didn't say, hey, you could open dine-in at 50% capacity or 20% capacity. But it's really up to the determination of each establishment to determine their capacity based on what they could do with the restrictions. So we know that they are required to have some sort of separation between tables. Party size is limited to no more than 10 people or less at a given table, if that is possible at restaurants. Some restaurants might not have the ability to seat 10 people. There's a lot of more online type of making reservations, getting rid of common areas. So a lot of areas where people were able to sit and wait till their table was ready is no longer available. So restaurants are trying to implement a lot of that. Hair salons, right? You could no longer have that coffee station that we all appreciated. So that is no longer allowed. You will have to kind of make sure you're loaded up before you go to the salon. No product testing, no kind of cross utilization of any type of product or handling. The chairs and equipment are under additional scrutiny around cleanliness and use between each client. Offices, very similar as well. They're still recommending that if folks are able to work from home, to continue to work from home if that is possible, or have modified return to office. So we're seeing, similar to restaurants, folks coming back to their work environments in lesser capacity. So maybe 50% of the staff is at an office setting versus having everyone there, staggered schedules, many recommendations that were made. As you see on the slide here, we put the phone number for ODH, the Ohio Department of Health, if you have any specific questions. And obviously, this is just a quick summary of some of those recommendations based on the industry. So what are folks doing, right? What are restaurants, what are businesses doing all together? Here is an example of one of our clients, Touch a Class business, that has started to communicate to its customers that it is going to reserve the right, basically, of customers coming in. So it's really pleading with its customers or asking its customers that if you have any of these symptoms, please, reschedule your appointment. Do not come in. Let's try to protect the employees and other clients on making sure that we are all following guidelines. So if you are symptomatic, if you have a fever, if you have any of the other things that they're looking for, if you've traveled, if you've been exposed to anyone with COVID, really asking them not to come in for service and just reschedule if that is possible. So we'll be talking throughout this presentation and continuously about communication, because I think this is the biggest part of this, or a huge part of our discussion today. It is the responsibility of the entrepreneur. It is your responsibility as a business owner to make sure that your customers understand the expectation when visiting your establishment, right? So we'll, again, continue to drill on that as we move forward on the presentation. So now we've seen the dates, we know what's open, we know we could go back to work, but what does that mean, right? We need to assess for each individual business, when is the right time to open, right? Just because patios were able to open on the 15th or restaurants open on the 21st doesn't mean your business might be ready, and that's okay. We're seeing a lot of businesses really make an assessment on what is it that needs to happen before they are able to open the doors safely, right? And so the first one to that is assessing your staff availability. As you saw in the first slide, daycares don't open till the 31st, right? And so you want to check in with your staff to determine what their situation is and their readiness to come back to work, or at least be able to have a plan or a discussion on what that looks like for each individual's staff, so that you have an understanding on your staff capacity to do that. Educate yourself on what are the CDC guidelines and recommendations based on your industry, right? What are the modifications that you need to do to be able to reopen your business safely and effectively? So that takes time. A lot of it is left to interpretation. So make sure that you spend some time, and if you don't understand or if you have a question about something that you're trying to implement, that you reach out to ODH directly, reach out to one of our business advisors, so that we could really figure it out and you feel very confident on your reopening strategy and your policies and procedures that you'll be implementing. For those of you that have a physical space, creating a work plan that works effectively, right? All of the industries that I just mentioned, office settings, beauty salons, barber shops, restaurants, all have some work to do around modifying their space to make it efficient and make it safe for staff and for customers, right? So what does that look like for you? And again, how does that limit your capacity? We've seen some of the barber shops and hair salons, if they had 5 chairs, they're only using every other chair to create some distance. And so scheduling as well, limiting it that way. So again, what does that look like from a physical perspective, but also from a customer flow into your floor plan and into your space? And then lastly, modify your store hours and service levels, right? Again, as I mentioned before, just because the state says you could open doesn't mean you need to. You could decide what that timeline looks like for your business. You might need a little bit more time to be able to make the accommodations that are necessary to your workspace to open. And that's okay. That is absolutely okay. Take the time that is needed so that when you open, you could assure your staff and your customers that you are ready and you're doing it in the safest way possible. The other piece of that is that while you might open, you might not have full service, right? Or you might, there was a business near my home that decided that Mondays and Tuesdays, they're not opening. So they're only open Wednesday through Sunday, right? So they're doing a modified service schedule. Because that is what works for them based on their capacity and their ability to deliver. You may not, have all of the full services that you had prior to COVID. So you might be working on limited services for many issues, right? We know supply chain has been affected. We know there's a lot of different factors that go into being able to open. So determine what that is and know that, feel confident that that is okay. You need to work with what you have and understand your limitations during this period and however long that needs to maintain. So the biggest one is communication, right? Like once we figured it out as an entrepreneur, once I know exactly what I need to do to reopen my business safely and effectively, once I have my staff lined up, I have everything I need to go, the next step is to be able to communicate, right? Obviously, your first one is communicating with your staff and making sure they are trained and have the tools necessary and the products or everything you might need to get started. But then it's communicating to your customers. Everybody wants to know, when are you opening back up? When are you open? When can I come by? When can I purchase whatever? When can we continue services, right? We know even on the professional services, you know, contracts have been put on hold. So this is a time for you to really have those types of communications with your customers so that they understand that you are back in business, right? And that you are ready to serve them, but also what are the rules of engagement? How are you going to be able to do that moving forward? Describe your plan. You know, definitely be open on what you're doing. People want to feel safe. I think more than now, there's so much uncertainty, and it is so important for them to feel that you as a business owner care about them enough to make sure that you have followed all CDC guidelines and have implemented them into your reopening strategy. Leverage social media, right, to communicate your opening date, your levels of service, as well as your safety precautions and your safety measures. That provides a level of security that we all need as we start coming back out into the world, right? I feel like we've been cocooned and now all of a sudden we're coming back out to the world. So we need to feel as secure and as safe as possible. Create visible signage, right? For people to understand. We know that it's been hard to keep up with what's open, what's closed, what level of service they're providing. I know specifically for us at the center, we have been trying to keep up with our restaurants so that we can support them, but it's been all over the place, right? So yeah, social media is great. Yeah, if you have an e-newsletter, if you have a website, making sure you're communicating in those means. But if you have a physical brick and mortar, also making sure that people know that you are open for business. We have seen a lot of creative storefronts with folks with "We are open" signs to make sure that you make that clear. But also at your door, make sure that you have signs related to what is expected, right? Like, you know, are people expected, you know, we'll talk about this later, wearing masks or, you know, seating, or again, the example that we had earlier from Touch of Class related to being symptomatic. So definitely work on signage, spend some time on signage so that it's clear, but that it's also very visible. Communicating with your staff, making sure that they understand what you're doing before opening, what you're doing during opening, what happens when you're done for business every day. You know, what are the procedures that you're gonna leave the establishment and ready for business the next day. And again, making sure they have everything that's necessary. We know that there's such limitation in purchase and scarcity in products. So that's another piece that we wanna make sure that your staff has what they need so they could properly take care of your business. Schedule training and ongoing education, right? This is not a one-time, one-hit wonder. This is something that's going to be continuous. And as we start preparing and adjusting to a COVID environment, right, in our businesses, it is important that we continue to stay informed and continue not only, you know, as business owners, right, and as, like, for me as a leader in the organization, it's important that I stay informed, but then also how am I communicating that to my team? So it does require some thoughtfulness. It definitely requires time and commitment to that, but just making sure that we are continuously staying informed and educated, and then could share that with our constituents. Over communication, you know, this is a situation where we want to be as good, if not better, than politicians, right? We want to make sure that people understand exactly, again, what are the rules? How do you conduct yourself in a specific business? What are, how, they need to conduct themselves, if they need to wear a mask, if they need to make sure they keep their distancing. You know, we see a lot of stores putting one-way signs on the floor, which is very difficult to follow. But what are some of those things that we can continue to train our clients, our customers on? and ask for their input, right? Ask for how are people feeling, how was your experience? Follow up with your customers in understanding, like, did they feel safe? Did they feel like you've done everything you could do to make sure that they felt welcome back? Or if you have some customers that, want to come back but have some hesitancy, ask them, like, what would make you feel safe and comfortable to come back to my establishment, and really take those recommendations. Again, there's so much uncertainty, and we all have various levels of, of risk tolerance, as well as how do we manage our own risk and how do we process what's happening. And so we want to be able to address those. So feel free to have those open conversations with your existing customers or customers that you want to have back, haven't been there, and the folks that do come through. Make sure you're getting some feedback on what was their sentiment. Did they feel safe? Is there anything that you could have done to make them feel safer? Is there any recommendations that they have? Remember that we're learning together, and customers understand that and get that. So it's also it's also very positive to make them feel like they're part of your process, just like they are part of your business and part of your growth. So next we have an example of one of our business owners that worked a plan on how exactly, what is their plan. This is the business's SALT. And so here's their information on reopening, right? And while this is a whole lot of content, this was an example that our staff members picked because it was so thorough and it was so detailed around, the size of a party and, what are the limitations, right? As much as we're all ready to get out of our houses and hang out with our friends for hours in a restaurant, that might not be the safest thing to do, right? So based on the party size, they're creating limitations on how long you could stay in an establishment, and really setting these rules up front, right? We don't want anybody to be frustrated or upset, specifically when you're out in a night, but also want to create some expectations around how business is going to conduct. So again, on the side, you will also see what their posts look like, right? What their social media posts look like on taking their time to reopen. This is another business who's being very thoughtful and doesn't feel the pressure on saying, oh my God, I got to open on May 21st because the state says I could open May 21st, but they're taking their time and being very thoughtful on how they are going to reopen in a way that is going to be effective. Remember that just, one of the biggest fears we all have, right, is that the economy opens up, businesses open up for economical reasons, but then we create a larger public health situation, right? And so it's each of our responsibilities to ensure that that doesn't happen, to protect our families, our employees, and customers. So there's tons of examples out there. Again, this was just one that was very thoughtful, and wanted to share that one with you. So how do we get into developing our own rules of engagement in our business, right? We know that while, the state, a lot of what they've given us is they say recommendations, right? And sometimes interpreting recommendations, the word recommendations, is a little bit challenging, right? Does everybody have to wear masks? Do they not? We even saw the governor last month go back and forth on saying, hey, when you're in public, masks are required. And then it was like, well, they're not required, they're recommended, right? So we're seeing a lot of that back and forth because they're also trying to figure out what the best is for Ohioans, right? So here it's time for you to create your own rules of engagement, right? And how do you interpret the recommendations that the CDC is making and implementing them into your business? So are all of your staff members wearing a mask, right? Are customers expected to wear a mask? Wearing a mask in some industries is very difficult, right? If you're at a restaurant, wearing a mask might be nearly impossible. So that might not be something that applies there, but all of the employees, and as I've seen, a little bit that I've gotten out, most employees and most business places have their employees wear a mask. Again, there are some, if some industries that might not be possible. So you have to go with what makes sense for you. Are you only doing carry out still, right? Like we have the question around delivery, carry out with dine-in, right? So communicate what is your level of service? Again, as I mentioned previously, what is it that you're offering, until when, and what are the rules? Do you call and we do curbside, or are you able to come into the establishment and pick up your order? Or are you able to come in and dine in with us again? So figuring it out, what those things mean for you. Are you going to check the temperature of your employees when they report to their shifts, right? Are you going to ensure that they themselves are not symptomatic and are doing well, right? We are operating in a trust value system, right? That we hope that people understand the severity of this, but we also know that people are dying to get back to work. We know that people are desperate to make money and to get back. And so sometimes that might taint our judgment. And so as a business owner, you might decide that, hey, when my staff shows up to work, I want to at least do everything I can and make sure that we've gotten a temperature read, or make sure that nobody has a fever, or, you know, anybody has any types of signs that might reflect that something is going on, right? And it's very difficult. It's allergy season. I know yesterday, if you guys would have heard me, you would have thought I was sick. So, you know, we want to be mindful of that too, but most importantly is keeping people safe and healthy. So that's another determination that you and your team will need to make in this process. So the next one, we have an example again, Banter, one of our clients. Again, they're still doing carry out orders. So you could call in. They are working on determining how they're going to implement their own policies and procedures to be able to open safely. Again, here's another example of folks not rushing in, but really being thoughtful and coordinated on making sure that you're able to do what has to happen. You know, everybody, it seems like we're all going to be in fish tanks with all of this plexiglass that's going up to keep us safe in any setting, right? And we're seeing it in office settings, we're seeing it at the bank, we're seeing it at restaurants, just about everywhere. It seems like, you know, using this sort of plastic divider between us is the right way to go. So sometimes getting vendors to be able to do that is going to take time. I know here in the office, we ordered, you know, plexiglass stands for our desks, for our workstations, for the front desk. It's going to take 20 days, if not a month, to get that in, right? So that some of those modifications are also going to play a role in when you actually will be able to open. So I think here is more important that you're thoughtful and concise. Yes, we all want to rush. We want you to be open because we want to support your establishment. The business owners want to be open because we need to make money, right? We've all lost in this. We want to be back open, but we also want to be thoughtful and coordinated in our efforts of getting that done. And then getting your finances in order, right? Like the not so fun stuff. One thing that I want to mention that's not necessarily on a bullet, but you know, there's cost implications to all of this, right? If you're making physical modifications to your floor plan or workspace, there is an expense to that. So we need to calculate that or figure out how we're going to be able to pay it and make it up in some way. But as we're looking to reopening up, you know, we definitely talked about staffing levels. If you are a restaurant and are still doing carry out or are still doing, you know, modified menus, you might not be at a point where you could actually get 100% of your employees back, right? You might open at 20%, you might open at 30%. And what does that mean for you from a financial perspective, right? Like your hours of operations is another determinant of what that's going to mean for your financials and your sales volume. What is the expected amount of clients that you could expect or sales that you could make to meet that up? So we need to make sure that you have a modified financial plan, again, around your staffing capacity that'll be needed to serve customers at whatever level of service you're able to provide. And where's your break even to that, right? How many orders do you need to fulfill? How many dollars do you need to get in sales in order to break even and turn a profit? One of the examples we saw early on when restaurants went into carry out only, right? A lot of restaurants really tried to stay open, but unfortunately couldn't do it, right? They had to close down. And they had to close down because the service volume, their sales volume would not support their operations. And so it was just a better decision to say, let's wait until we could open, full spin or somewhat full spin, instead of continuing to try to stay open and possibly operating in the negative. Again, and we didn't have a timeline on how long that could go on. So that was a decision that folks had to make based on, again, their capacity to sell, their staffing levels, their hours of operations, and whatever that looks like. So now that we are reopening and you're creating that plan along with everything else you're doing, you want to have a clear financial plan and saying, hey, these are hours of operations. This is our capacity to serve our clients. These are the products and services that we're able to deliver at whatever, cost that might be. And this is my break even and where where we could start turning a profit, again, being the biggest goal of us right now. Do you need to secure extra funding to bridge the gap, right? We know that these last 2 months, every business took an enormous hit. Even if you were still able to stay in operation, everybody took a hit. So what does it take to get you back, and how do you support that gap, right? We still had rent to pay, we still had bills to pay, we still had staff to pay, we still have medical insurance. So costs did not necessarily stop because our business might have been closed down. So that definitely puts you in a very difficult position. And so we want to understand what that gap is. How do we bridge that gap of the funds that you were still incurring during the time that you were closed so that you could be successful? And how can we do that, right? Is it a loan? Is it, borrowing money from somewhere? Is it, a savings account? Figuring out a strategy on how to bridge your gap during that time. Many businesses, we are super excited to hear that a lot of businesses, or some of our businesses, were able to secure PPP funding, a PPP forgiveness loan, other SBA-backed funding, City of Cleveland funding, the county programs, grant funds, right? So we know that there has been some success in being able to get COVID response support to small businesses. Now we need to figure out, how do we administer that, right? What are the requirements that those funding sources have? What is the repayment terms, right? We need to make sure that we anticipate those repayment terms into our updated financials, because right now I think lenders are being very flexible, but some of these have an intention are expected to be repaid, right? They are a loan, and we need to repay them. So we also need to have a plan on how and when we will be able to repay these loans. I do tell you that if for whatever reason you foresee that being a challenge, have the conversation with lenders. They're being super flexible, and I think there is an enormous desire to really help small businesses currently. So feel free to have those conversations early on. Don't wait till the payment starts and you're a month behind or 2 months behind. Have that conversation as you foresee it happening. Again, we know some of them have been very flexible as far as payback, but ultimately we do have to pay them back. And on the other side, if you got a forgiveness loan like PPP, then we have some reporting guidelines or requirements that we need to follow. So we want to make sure that you set that up from the start, so that as you need to report, that those mechanisms are already created. If you have any questions or are unsure how to do that, right? A lot of folks got PPP and it's like, now what, right? Be sure to schedule some time with a business advisor so that we can help you figure that out. Again, it's easier to figure it out at the front end than the back end and trying to scramble for documentation or verification. And we recognize that some entrepreneurs might not, this might be the first time they get a loan, or it might be the first time that they get any type of funding. So this is new to a lot of us, and it's okay. We are learning together. I think the most important part of it is to tap into the resources that are available so that you are able to be ready and not have to stress about this and not lose sleep over it, and really have a plan, right? So that planning is really going to be key. And so our last one is really reevaluate, right? Again, this stuff is changing daily. You know, we have no idea what the public health implications are going to be with all of this reopening in June, right? So June is going to be a month of uncertainty, of learning, right? Of figuring out what works and what doesn't work. And so it is really, really, really important that we stay informed, that we know what's happening, that we're watching the trends with the public health department, that we look at our peers. What are other businesses of our, you know, within our industry doing that's creative and innovative in this, or any pitfalls that we might see that they're committing that we want to stay away from. So really staying informed. It's a lot. I know it's a lot. It's a lot. But this is just the reality of the environment we're living in, and we just have to navigate through it as best as we can. Reassess, right? You might have had some ideas initially that made sense, and later on it's like, okay, well, maybe not, you know. We know that face masks, again, are really controversial. People have a preference or not. So you might start out saying, hey, face masks are absolutely mandatory for any customer to have service. You know, later on down the road, you might decide, well, you know, we're going to leave it up to our customers to use their judgment to do that. That's just an example, and not a recommendation by far. But definitely, you know, starting to reassess what are our rules. Maybe you are able to then open up at full capacity. Maybe you need to scale back. Maybe you open at full capacity and say, hey, we need time at the end of the day to disinfect, to clean, to process, you know. So whatever that might be, make sure you're reassessing and modifying and tweaking that. And lastly, what am I going to say again, right? Communicate. How then are you informing staff and customers of new rules of engagement or changes that you have made? That we cannot drill on that piece enough, because, you know, right now we are all looking for information. We all want to be informed. We all have a need to feel safe. So that concludes the formal piece of this. We have some links here that the team utilized to put together this presentation today. So some resources from you from the CDC to the state of Ohio and the governor's website. As you know, he is doing press conferences just about every day at 2 o'clock. So hard to keep up with, specifically while we're working. But they are trying to do a good job at keeping all of the information on the website. So you could definitely go on there and figure that out. So I will stop there and figure out if there's any questions or thoughts around the content or reopening at this time. Everybody's pretty quiet, so I don't see any questions on the chat. Maria, do you want to open up microphones to see if you guys can actually ask your question? Or it's not just a question, any thoughts, anything you want to share on this, anything that you are doing that's creative and innovative for your business that you would like to share with other entrepreneurs, please. Again, we're all learning together. We are jacks of all trades and masters of none, right? That's the life of an entrepreneur. But definitely there's a lot that we could learn from each other, right? And so if there are some suggestions or best practices or things that you've seen other people do, please proceed to make those comments at this time.
Denise, it's Suzanne.
Hi, Suzanne.
Hi. I was on a call this morning with one of the CPAs that I do business with, and she was talking in more specifics about the PPP loan forgiveness program and the phase that they're all moving into to help the business owners capitalize on using the money in a way that will keep them from having to pay it back. And it sounds like there's a lot of confusion on this side of it. And so I just wanted to encourage everybody, if you have a PPP loan or if you know of a business who does, the critical piece now is, you know, the 8 weeks started counting from the day that the money was received in your account. And if you don't have an accountant working closely with you on this, you could find yourself in a position where you might have to pay some money back, and the accountants are building out the process to help to alleviate that. And there are lots of things you can use that money for. So the way she was describing it this morning, it just sounds like it's more confusing than ever. And I don't know if you guys are hearing the same thing, Janice, and what we can do to help.
Yeah, I see George Pimentel on the call. So he is working directly with a lot of our clients and in his own practice with sorting out PPP from start helping people with the applications to actually managing the funds. George, are you able to bless us with some comments around now that people got PPP, what happens?
Yes, I was waiting for the speaker to finish. I've been working with some of the clients who have already received the PPP. As soon as they file or sign the documents, they get this list of approved expenses. And the sooner we get this information, this is something that we can help through the center set it up. If you already have an accounting system, there's a way that we can track it, and it's gonna be a lot easier than just having to put papers together. So I will encourage everybody who received the loan to contact the center and start the process as soon as possible. You don't want to leave money on the table.
Thank you, George. Yep, absolutely true. So to Suzanne and George's, work with someone. This is not a stimulus check, people. This has accountability and strings attached to it. And if not managed correctly, you will have to pay it back, right? We can't drive on that enough. So we want to make sure that we are managing it appropriately, and it's okay. It is above all of our heads. So I think this is the piece where we want to make sure that we're tapping into the resources available, like George and the rest of the team at our office, or just really, you could hire your own, whatever works. We just want to make sure that you have the right systems in place so that you have the accountability and the track record necessary to be successful for this. I did see a comment on our chat box from Richard. Thank you, Richard. Related to managing customers, right? Managing our staff is one thing, managing employees, we're used to doing that. Managing customers is a whole other ball of wax, right? I mentioned to staff yesterday during our call, just the phenomenon of what happened when patios opened, right? Patios opened and a lot of restaurants just jumped at it, right? They jumped at the opportunity to open for sale. Saturday was a beautiful day, but unfortunately didn't manage capacity issues, didn't manage the amount of time that customers were there, didn't create the proper protocols, and created a really unsafe environment for their staff and their customers. There was one, I'm not going to name the business, but they posted on one of the social media outlets saying, we cannot control our customers. And that is such a bad answer, right? You are responsible for your customers and your establishment. And so it is your responsibility to manage your customers and to be able to reserve the right to provide services or not, or to ask a party to leave if for whatever reason they are being unsafe or not conducting themselves in a manner that is expected. But if we take that example from a learning, right? What happened? They rushed to open. They didn't create policies and procedures on how they were going to open. They didn't train their staff, right, on what needed to happen around, capacity counts, around maybe time limits that people were able to start, and therefore created a situation that was really unfortunate for its patrons, and again, for its staff. So it is very important to think about these things before they happen. You know your customers better than anybody, right? For those of you that are already, so you could almost foresee what are some of those things that issues that people might have, and plan for it and make sure you have a policy around it. So ultimately it is up to you. We have another one, increased adoption and collaboration of tools with core employees. Toolstick managers, ownership, and ensure use of tools. Yes, thank you, JCG. JC are my initials as well. But absolutely, there's so many tools that we could use to help us stay on top of things and to communicate with our employees. So, some examples, Slack, Trello. I know a lot of folks are using Teams. There's so many mechanisms out there. I know we've used, for some of our entrepreneurs, we've used the Facebook workspace. So there's a gazillion tools for communication. You just have to figure out which one is best for you and your team to communicate on a daily basis, specifically for those of us that are working remotely, right? That we are not at the office and we don't have that day-to-day interaction. And it's amazing how much is lost, right? How much communication doesn't happen because we are just not physically in the same, doing the same operations as we're used to. Yet the need to communicate has intensified, right? The need has increased, yet our ability to see each other day to day. So we definitely need to rely on some of those tools, and we'll be making an announcement of what's happening next week that I think directly hints on that. Anything else from our audience and our friends that are on this call today? Great. I'm going to actually ask Randy if he has any updates. If you don't, we're good. But I saw you jump on, Randy.
Buenos dias. Good morning, everyone. I'm a little late. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Yes.
Okay. I'm a little late to the party. It's been quite an eventful morning, to say the least. Nonetheless, I am happy that I was able to tag in and listen to such great voices as Janice and George. I saw Suzanne speaking as well. So the reality is we are reopening no matter what. We have to be valiant. We have to make the best decisions possible for success. This is the reason why we're in business, to be successful, to provide for ourselves, for our families, for our loved ones, and to just progress, right? So as I've said every single webinar, an entrepreneur is a person who takes risks. And you know what? That's who we are. And right now, this is one of those moments where many people have questions, many people are doubtful. It's also a moment to take into consideration that there's a lot of opportunities. I was in a meeting last night with 2 entrepreneurs, and they saw an opportunity. They were uncomfortable with it, but they took it and ran with it. So it's a great time. Nonetheless, just to make it really short, it's called Screen Clean and 6 Feet in Between. University Hospital just coined it. It's actually trademarked. But Screen Clean and 6 Feet in Between it's a baseline. And so I will make sure that I actually have a printout of this article that UH put out. I'll have my share it with all of you guys. I do have a couple updates for PPP specifically. And so here it goes. If a small business is a seasonal business whose activity increases from like April to June, so let's say landscapers or whatnot, the question is, even though they were not fully ramped up in February when PPP or EIDL started, are they still eligible? The reality is it's still a gray line. It doesn't sound like an update, but I want people to know that the questions are being asked. And basically what the SBA responded was that they're gonna leave that question for banks to answer. It's basically what they got. So this is gonna depend on who your lender is. Another clarification that the SBA put out is and here's a question. I need to request a loan to support my small business operations in light of current economic uncertainty. However, I pleaded guilty to a felony crime a very long time ago. Am I still eligible for PPP? Yes, you are eligible. Now, here is the token. This is what you got to take into consideration. If a business partner or one of the owners of the business who has at least 20% or more of equity in the business, if they are presently incarcerated, or if they're in probation, if they're on parole, subject to indictment, criminal information or arrangement, or anything else, or within the last 5 years, you don't qualify. The company won't qualify. So this is for any owner, partner, whatever it may be, or member for most LLCs. If you have 20% stake and you have any of this within your record within the last 5 years, you probably won't qualify. Now, why do I say you probably won't? Because the SBA has stipulated time and over again that when in doubt, apply, 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 apply. So still apply. They may say no, it's all right. We want to make sure we get a secured no, and we don't lose any opportunities. Also, the last one I do want to share with you guys is, should payments that an eligible borrower made to an independent contractor or sole proprietor be included in calculations of the eligible borrower's payroll cost? This is the answer. This is verbatim what they wrote. No. Any amounts that an eligible borrower has paid to an independent contractor or sole proprietor should be excluded from the eligible business's payroll. So for people who are in construction specifically, most of us, when we're starting, we use subcontractors. You can't take what you pay them as your payroll because that's a different company. So those are the updates I did want to share with you guys. Any questions from anyone? Sounds like we're good. I do want to remind everyone that just like George said, we don't want to leave any money on the table. If you need help, we are here to help you. Our office doors are closed, but our customer service is still 100% working. We are taking phone calls, we are taking emails, whatever. If just like this video conferencing or teleconferencing, we are here to help. We are your resource. If we don't have it in-house, I guarantee you, we will get you connected to the organization or the person that will help you move forward. So remember, we are sold out for you guys. We are sold out for our community, our entrepreneurs, and we are going up to bat and we are smacking it out of the ballpark. So stay up, guys. We are slowly getting out of this pandemic, and I promise you, we're gonna be on top when we get out. So take care, everyone.
Great. So we have, thank you, Randy, for your updates and for the enthusiasm, right? We all need it on this rainy Friday day as we're getting into the holiday weekend. So that is great. Next week, we'll be back Fridays at 11 o'clock. Feel free to share this information. You will get an email with any content if you want to review the information provided, as we do with every Friday. Know that anyone is welcome to participate in our Business as Unusual, so please feel free to share information on our future webinars coming up. Next week, one of the things that we wanted to share is our topic would be on this whole communication and communication tools. So we will have one of our extraordinary business advisors that will talk about what tools are out there and how to navigate, right? Which ones are the right ones for you? What is the frequency of communications? You know, what is it that you need to communicate to what audience? How do you target your audience? So getting more into the weeds, as we understand that right now connecting in this virtual environment is the most important, specifically when we're communicating really crucial information on how we're open, when we're open, and what we can do. So definitely next week, be sure to tune in. There's something there for all of us. Every time I listen, I learn something new on some sort of new platform or app workshop or resource available to entrepreneurs and the community as a whole. And then in 2 weeks from now, which I believe is June 5th, I'm not going to have a calendar in front of me, we will actually have our one of our CPAs, Luis Cartagena, who will be talking about PPP and readiness. You've got some funding. What do you do with it? How do you manage? You don't have funding and you have a gap. What can you do, right? So we're really going to dive in deeper in that. In our conversation today, those are the two topics that we drilled on most, right? How are you communicating? And then your financials and your ability to perform. And so we want to make sure that we are able to dive in a little deeper in our future webinars on those two topics. So we look forward to seeing you again. We appreciate your support. We appreciate the love. Please stay healthy, be well. As Randy mentioned, we are open for business. So feel free to reach out if there's anything that we can help you with. Everyone have a safe and fun Memorial Day weekend as best as we can with all of this rain. We look forward to seeing you soon. If not, through our center, we will see you on a webinar or in the community. Have a good one. Take care, everyone.